When all hope faded, a human war armada burst. From the void, the dying light, the warning siren screamed across. Kepler Prime, as Admiral Vexithara, stood before the massive holographic display in the Coalition Command Center. Her crystalline form caught the red emergency lights, casting rainbow patterns on the metal walls. The display showed their galaxy, but most of it was now painted in the dark crimson of conquered space. "Admiral, we're receiving the final transmission from Battle Group 7, reported Lieutenant Kalamor, his voice trembling. The young Arathi officer's gas-filled suit hissed as he moved, his tentacles dancing nervously over the control panel. Vexithara closed her three eyes and prepared for the worst. Battle Group 7 was their last major fleet, 15,000 ships and their best commanders. If they had fallen, then the Coalition had nothing left to stop the Devourers. The transmission crackled to life. Commander Zektos's voice was barely recognizable through the static and battle noise. "Coalition Command, this is Battle Group 7. All ships lost. Repeat, all ships lost. The Devourers have broken through the outer rim. Their main force is heading directly for the core worlds. We estimate 48 hours before they reach your position." The transmission cut to static. In the silence that followed, Vexithara could hear her own crystalline heart resonating in her chest. Around her, officers from 12 different species stood frozen in shock. The collectivist's shared mind buzzed with panicked thoughts that leaked into the room like whispers. The rock-skinned granite folk simply stood still, as they always did in moments of great stress. 48 hours, Vexithara said quietly. Her voice carried across the command center, and every being present turned to look at her. "After 3 years of war, we have 48 hours before the Devourers reach the heart of our civilization." The Devourers were unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. They weren't organic beings driven by hunger or greed. They were machines, ancient, intelligent machines that consumed entire star systems to fuel their endless expansion. They broke down planets into raw materials, absorbed the energy of stars, and turned everything into more of themselves. The Coalition had fought them with everything they had. The crystal cities of Zephyr had contributed their light-based weapons. The Arathi had provided their storm ships that could ride solar winds. The collectivists had offered their perfect coordination and shared consciousness. The granite folk had built massive fortress ships that could take incredible damage. None of it mattered. The Devourers adapted to every weapon, overcame every defense, and learned from every battle. They were patient and methodical, never taking unnecessary risks. They simply ground down their enemies through superior numbers and technology. "What are our remaining forces?" Vexithara asked. Lieutenant Kalamor's tentacles moved quickly over his controls. "We have the home defense fleets of the core worlds. Perhaps 8,000 ships total, but most are patrol vessels and older models. The planetary defense platforms around each world add another 2,000 weapons platforms. 10,000 defenders against a force that had just destroyed 15,000 of their best ships." The mathematics were simple and brutal. "Sir," called out Sergeant Thrix from the communication station. The insectoid swarm representative clicked her mandibles nervously. "We're receiving surrender requests from 6 outer colonies. They want to know if the Coalition will negotiate with the Devourers." Vexithara felt her crystalline form darken with anger. "Tell them there is nothing to negotiate. The Devourers don't want our surrender. They want our atoms." It was true. The Devourers had never responded to any communication attempts. They simply arrived at a system, cataloged its resources, and began the harvest. Planets were stripped down to their cores within days. Stars were drained of their energy and left as cold, dead spheres. Nothing remained behind except empty space and the memory of what had once been. "Admiral," said Dr. Kaelwyn, the chief science officer. The elderly Zephyrian's crystal form was dim with age and worry. "Perhaps it's time to consider the evacuation protocols. We could save some of our people, preserve our cultures and knowledge in hidden colonies beyond the galactic rim." "And leave billions to die?" Vexithara asked. "Leave our worlds to be consumed while we run and hide?" "It would be survival, Admiral. Sometimes survival is all we can achieve." Vexithara turned back to the galactic display. The red zones were spreading like an infection, world by world, system by system. In 3 years, the Devourers had consumed nearly a third of the galaxy. Their advance was slow but unstoppable. "Sir, there's something else," Lieutenant Kalamor said hesitantly. Before Battle Group 7 was destroyed, they transmitted some unusual sensor readings. They detected massive gravitational distortions at the edge of the galaxy, near the void between galaxies. Gravitational distortions? Yes, sir. The readings suggest something very large emerging from dark space. But it could be sensor ghosts caused by the battle damage. Vexathera nodded absently. False readings were common during battles, especially when ships were being destroyed. The energy releases could confuse even the best sensors. A new alarm began to sound, a different tone that made everyone in the command center freeze. It was the long-range scanner alert, the one that meant something big was approaching their system. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported the scanner operator. Multiple contacts. Devourer scout ships estimated arrival in 6 hours. The room erupted in controlled chaos as officers began implementing emergency protocols. Defense platforms powered up their weapons. The home fleet moved into defensive positions. Evacuation ships prepared to launch from the civilian areas, but Vexathera knew it was all meaningless. 6 Devourer scout ships could destroy their entire defense fleet. The real attack would come later, when the main force arrived. The scouts were just here to study their defenses and plan the most efficient harvest. Admiral, Dr. Kalewin approached her. There are the old archives in the deep vaults. Stories about the silent species that once lived in this galaxy. Myths and legends, Vexathera replied. Stories to comfort children, perhaps. But the legends say they didn't die. They say they went into the dark spaces between galaxies, waiting for a time when the galaxy needed them most. Vexathera looked at the old scientist. His crystalline form was flickering with hope, a hope she couldn't share. Dr. Kalewin, even if the silent species existed, even if they survived somewhere in the void, they've been gone for thousands of years. Why would they return now? Because, the old Zephyrian said quietly, according to the legends, they left because they knew this day would come. The Admiral turned back to the display showing the approaching Devourer scouts. In 6 hours they would arrive. In 48 hours the main force would follow. And then, the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known would become nothing more than raw materials for an endless machine empire. All hope was fading. The light of a billion worlds was about to be extinguished forever. But in the deep archives below, ancient data crystals held secrets that no living being remembered. And at the edge of the galaxy, something was stirring in the void between stars. Something that had been waiting a very long time for this moment to arrive. Echoes in the dark. Dr. Kethvar moved through the ancient archives deep beneath Kepler Prime's surface. The corridors were old, older than the Coalition itself. They had been carved by the silent species thousands of years ago, before they vanished from the galaxy. The walls still showed their geometric patterns, precise and mathematical in ways that hurt to look at for too long. His footsteps echoed in the empty halls as he carried his equipment toward the deepest vault. Above him, the battle for Kepler Prime was beginning. The Devourer scouts had arrived 6 hours ago and were already scanning the planet's defenses. Soon the real attack would come, but Kethvar wasn't thinking about the battle. He was thinking about the gravitational readings that Lieutenant Kalamor had mentioned. Something big was moving at the edge of the galaxy, in the void where nothing should exist. The deepest vault was a spherical chamber carved from solid rock. Ancient data crystals covered every surface, glowing faintly with stored information. These crystals contained everything the Coalition had learned about the silent species, which wasn't much. The silent species had been masters of technology beyond anything the current galaxy could understand. Then one day they simply left, no bodies, no ruins showing signs of destruction. They had packed up their entire civilization and vanished, leaving behind only empty cities and these data crystals that no one could fully decode. Kethvar set up his equipment and began scanning the crystals. Most of them contained basic information, star charts, mathematical formulas, and what appeared to be historical records. But buried deep in the quantum layers of data, he had found something else, encrypted transmissions that were still active, still sending signals into the void. His scanner began picking up patterns. The transmissions were incredibly sophisticated, using quantum entanglement to send information across vast distances instantly. But they weren't random. They were coordinated, like parts of a larger communication network. Computer, begin deep analysis of quantum layer 7, he said to his portable AI unit. The analysis would take hours, but Kethvar had learned to be patient. Above him, energy weapons flashed as the Coalition fleet engaged the Devourer scouts. The scouts were just testing their defenses, learning their weaknesses. The real battle would come when the main force arrived. While his computer worked, Kethvar studied the geometric patterns on the walls. The silent species had been obsessed with mathematics and precision. Every line, every angle had meaning. He had spent years learning to read their symbols, and he was beginning to understand that these weren't just decorations. They were instructions. Analysis complete, his computer announced. The quantum transmissions contain star charts and navigational data. The coordinates indicate positions beyond the galactic rim, in the void between galaxies. Kethvar felt his heart skip a beat. Show me the coordinates. The holographic display showed the galaxy with several points marked in the dark space beyond its edges. The positions matched exactly with the gravitational disturbances that deep space monitoring stations had detected. Computer, cross-reference these coordinates with current sensor readings from the galactic edge. Cross-reference complete. The coordinates match gravitational anomalies detected at stations 7, 12, and 15. Mass displacement suggests objects of enormous size. Enormous size. Kethvar stared at the display, his mind racing. The gravitational disturbances weren't sensor ghosts from the battle. They were real. Something massive was out there in the void, exactly where the silent species transmissions had been pointing for thousands of years. Computer, continue analysis. Look for any linguistic patterns in the transmissions. He began studying the wall patterns more carefully while the computer worked. The geometric shapes seemed to tell a story of departure and return. One section showed symbols representing the galaxy, with lines leading away from it into empty space. Another section showed the same lines returning, but the symbols were different, changed. Linguistic analysis complete. One phrase appears repeatedly in the transmissions. Translation: when darkness devours light, the silent shall speak. Kethvar nearly dropped his scanner. That phrase, he had seen it before, carved into ruins on 3 different worlds. Scholars had always assumed it was some kind of religious or philosophical statement. But what if it was literal? What if it was a promise? Above him, the lights flickered as the station's power grid was hit by weapons fire. The Coalition fleet was taking heavy losses against just 6 Devourer scouts. When the main force arrived, the slaughter would be complete. But the silent species had known this would happen. Their transmissions proved it. They had been preparing for this moment for thousands of years. Kethvar activated his emergency communicator. This is Dr. Kethvar in the Deep Archives. I need to speak with Admiral Vexithara immediately. Doctor, the Admiral is busy fighting a battle, came the reply. This is about the gravitational disturbances at the galactic edge. Tell her I found proof that they're not sensor ghosts. There was a long pause. Then Admiral Vexithara's voice came through the communicator. Doctor, you have 30 seconds. The Devourers are about to begin their main assault. Admiral, the silent species didn't die. They left quantum transmissions in their archives, and those transmissions have been sending signals to the void for thousands of years. The gravitational disturbances match the coordinates in their transmissions exactly. Another pause. What are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying the silent species knew the Devourers would come. They prepared for it, and they're coming back. Doctor, even if that's true, we don't have time to... The communication was cut off as a massive explosion shook the entire planet. Through the archive's thick walls, Kethvar could hear the sound of the city's shields failing. The Devourer main force had arrived, but at the galactic edge his instruments were detecting something new. The gravitational disturbances were growing stronger. Whatever was out there in the void was getting closer. Kethvar looked at the ancient symbols on the walls. The story they told was becoming clear. The silent species hadn't abandoned the galaxy. They had gone into exile to become something else, something capable of fighting the darkness when it came. When darkness devours light, the silent shall speak, he whispered. His scanner began beeping urgently. The quantum transmissions from the crystals were changing, becoming more active. After thousands of years of patient waiting, they were finally receiving responses. The responses were coming from the void. Something was out there. Something vast and powerful that had been waiting in the darkness between galaxies. The silent species hadn't fled in fear. They had left to prepare, to forge themselves into weapons capable of facing the Devourer threat. And now, as the galaxy burned and all hope faded, they were finally coming home. Kethvar gathered his data and began the long journey back to the surface. Above him, the Coalition was fighting its final battle. Ships were dying, worlds were burning, and an ancient evil was consuming everything in its path. But in the void between galaxies, something else ancient was stirring. Something that had been shaped by millennia of exile and preparation. Something that remembered what it meant to protect the light against the darkness. The Silent were about to speak. And when they did, the galaxy would never be the same. The Void Stirrers, Admiral Vexithara, stood in the ruins of the Coalition Command Center. Half the ceiling had collapsed when the Devourer bombardment broke through their shields. Emergency power cast strange shadows across the broken holographic displays. Around her, the survivors of her command staff worked frantically to coordinate the planet's final defense. "Admiral, we've lost contact with Defense Platform 7, reported Lieutenant Calamore. The young Arathi's environmental suit was cracked, and green fluid leaked slowly from a damaged tentacle. Platforms 3 and 11 are reporting critical damage. How many ships do we have left? 237, sir. The Devourers have brought their main harvester fleet. We count over 50,000 vessels." Vexithara nodded grimly. 50,000 against 200. The mathematics of extinction were simple and final. Above them, the sky burned with the light of dying ships and failing defense platforms. "Sir," called out Sergeant Thrix from her damaged communications console, "we're receiving an urgent transmission from Dr. Kethvar in the archives." "Put him through." The old scientist's voice crackled through the damaged speakers. "Admiral, you need to see this. The long-range sensors are detecting something impossible." "Doctor, unless it's a miracle, I don't have time." "It might be exactly that, sir. The gravitational disturbances at the galactic edge have increased by 300% in the last hour. Something enormous is emerging from the void." Despite everything, Vexithara felt a spark of curiosity. "How enormous?" "The mass readings suggest a fleet, Admiral. A fleet larger than anything we've ever seen." Vexithara looked at her tactical display. The Devourer fleet was systematically destroying their defenses, preparing for the final harvest. But if something else was out there...
"Can you get me visual confirmation?"
"Working on it now, sir. The deep space array is damaged, but... Wait. Admiral, you need to see this." The main display flickered and changed to show the edge of the galaxy. For a moment, there was nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then shapes began to appear, vast dark silhouettes emerging from the void between galaxies. "Enhanced magnification," Dr. Kethvar's voice said. The image zoomed in, and Vexithara felt her crystalline heart stop beating. Ships. Thousands of ships, sleek and deadly, unlike anything in the Coalition databases. Their hulls bore geometric patterns that looked familiar, the same patterns found in silent species ruins but evolved, refined by millennia of development. "The configuration is unknown," Lieutenant Calamore whispered. "Those designs, they're not in any of our records." But Vexithara was staring at the largest ships in the formation. They were massive beyond imagination, dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the biggest Devourer vessels. Their hulls seemed to shift and flow like living metal, and energy patterns danced across their surfaces. "Admiral!" Dr. Kethvar's voice was filled with excitement and fear. "I'm detecting energy signatures that match silent species technology, but advanced far beyond anything we've found in their ruins." "How many ships?" Vexithara asked. "Still counting, sir. At least 10,000, 15,000. "Admiral, the count is over 20,000 and still climbing." A new voice cut into the communications channel, calm, clear, and speaking in perfect Coalition standard. "Coalition forces, this is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the Void Fleet. We are moving to engage the Devourer forces. Request immediate tactical coordination." The command center fell silent. That voice, it was speaking Coalition standard, but with an accent no one recognized. And the name was foreign, unlike any naming convention used by known species. "This is Admiral Vexithara of the Coalition Defense Force," she replied. "Identify yourself and your species of origin." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "We are the children of the silent species, Admiral. We are human, and we have come home." Human. The word meant nothing to any of the Coalition species, but somehow it felt familiar. Ancient, like a half-remembered dream. "Admiral Vasquez, our sensors show you emerging from the void between galaxies." "How is that possible?" "It's a long story, Admiral Vexithara. But first we need to deal with the Devourers. We've been preparing for this moment for 50,000 years." The tactical display updated as the human fleet moved toward the galaxy. Their ships moved in perfect formation, accelerating to speeds that should have been impossible. But more shocking than their speed was their number. The count had reached 50,000 ships and was still climbing. "Admiral," Lieutenant Calamore whispered, "their fleet is the same size as the Devourer force." But as Vexithara watched, she realized the human fleet was different from anything she had ever seen. The ships didn't just move, they flowed like schools of fish or flocks of birds. Their formations shifted and changed with fluid grace as if the entire fleet was a single living organism. "Admiral Vasquez," Vexithara said, "the Devourers have adapted to every weapon we've used against them. What makes you think you can succeed where we have failed?" The reply came with quiet confidence. "Because we didn't run away to hide, Admiral. We ran away to become something the Devourers have never faced before." On the display, the first human ships were entering the galaxy's outer edge. As they did, something strange happened. The ships began to change, their hulls shifting and reconfiguring. Energy patterns flowed across their surfaces like neural networks coming online. "What are they doing?" someone whispered. "They're adapting." Dr. Kethvar's voice came through the speakers. "Their ships are alive, Admiral. They're not just machines, they're living vessels that can change and evolve in real time." The Devourer fleet had detected the human approach and was beginning to turn to face this new threat. But the humans didn't slow down or change course. They accelerated, diving straight toward the Devourer formation. "Admiral Vasquez," Vexithara said urgently, "you're outnumbered. The Devourers have superior firepower and armor." "Not anymore," came the reply. The first human ships reached the Devourer fleet and the galaxy erupted in light. But this wasn't the familiar light of energy weapons. This was something new, beams of pure force that seemed to tear holes in space itself. Devourer ships that had shrugged off coalition weapons began to break apart like paper in a storm. "Impossible," Lieutenant Calamore breathed. "Those Devourer ships have adaptive armor. Nothing can penetrate them that easily." But the humans were doing exactly that. Their weapons cut through Devourer defenses as if they weren't there. More than that, their tactics showed an intimate knowledge of Devourer weaknesses that the Coalition had never discovered. "Admiral," Dr. Kethvar's voice was filled with wonder, "I'm analyzing the human weapon signatures. They're using controlled dark matter and quantum field manipulation. These are technologies that don't exist in our databases." On the display, the battle raged as human and Devourer fleets clashed in the void. For the first time in 3 years, Vexithara was watching Devourer ships being destroyed faster than they could adapt. But she also noticed something else. The human ships weren't just winning, they were sacrificing themselves. Each victory came at a terrible cost, as human vessels threw themselves into impossible situations to destroy key Devourer targets. "Admiral Vasquez," she transmitted, "your casualties are enormous. You can't sustain these losses." The reply came back strained but determined. "Every loss hurts, Admiral. Our ships aren't just vessels, they're part of us. But we've come too far and waited too long to fail now." "Part of them?" Vexithara stared at the display as understanding dawned. The humans hadn't just built living ships, they had integrated with them, becoming something between organic life and artificial intelligence. Each ship that died took part of its crew with it. But they kept fighting. Ship after ship, sacrifice after sacrifice, they carved their way through the Devourer fleet with ruthless determination. The Silent had returned, and they were speaking in the only language the Devourers understood, the language of total war. The Silent speak. The tactical display in the Coalition Command Center showed a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human and Devourer fleets clashed across 3 star systems, their weapons turning empty space into a storm of energy and destruction. Admiral Vexithara watched in amazement as human ships danced through Devourer formations, their living hulls adapting and changing with each engagement. "Admiral Vasquez, we're establishing quantum communication protocols," Vexithara transmitted. "We need to coordinate our remaining forces with your fleet." The reply came instantly, transmitted directly into her mind through quantum neural linkage. The sensation was startling, like having another consciousness briefly touch her thoughts. "Admiral Vexithara, this is Elena Vasquez. I apologize for the direct neural contact, but it's the fastest way to share tactical information." Images flooded Vexithara's mind, memories that weren't her own. She saw the galaxy as it had been 50,000 years ago, when a young species called humanity, first detected signs of the Devourer threat at the galaxy's edge. She saw their desperate decision to flee not in cowardice but in preparation. "You left to become weapons," Vexithera said, understanding flooding through her. "We left to become something the Devourers couldn't adapt to," Elena replied through the neural link. "In the void between galaxies, we found resources and energies that don't exist in normal space. We evolved ourselves, our technology, our entire civilization around one purpose: stopping the Devourers." More images flowed through the connection. Vexithera saw human colonies in the dark spaces between galaxies, powered by exotic matter and dark energy. She saw humans gradually merging with their technology, becoming living extensions of their ships and weapons. She saw children born in quantum-linked pods, their minds connected to vast neural networks from birth. "You sacrificed your humanity to save the galaxy," Vexithera whispered. "We changed what it meant to be human," Elena corrected. "We became something new, something purpose-built for this war." On the display, the battle continued to rage. Human ships phased in and out of normal space, appearing behind Devourer formations and striking at vulnerable points before vanishing again. Their weapons used principles that the Coalition scientists couldn't even begin to understand. "How are you penetrating their adaptive armor?" Vexithera asked. Elena's thoughts carried a mix of pride and sadness. "We studied them for 50,000 years. Every piece of wreckage, every sensor reading, every fragment of data we could gather. We know their technology better than they do. More importantly, we learned to think like them." The neural link showed Vexithera glimpses of human research stations hidden in dark matter clouds, where scientists spent lifetimes analyzing Devourer technology. She saw humans who had modified their own minds to think in machine logic, becoming living computers dedicated to finding weaknesses in Devourer systems. "But you're taking enormous casualties," Vexithera observed. "Each ship lost is irreplaceable," Elena admitted. "Our integration with our vessels means that when a ship dies, part of its crew dies with it. We don't have the numbers to sustain this forever." As if to emphasize her point, a massive human dreadnought on the display suddenly erupted in brilliant light as Devourer weapons overwhelmed its defenses. Vexithera felt Elena's pain through the neural link. Each lost ship was like losing a piece of her own body. "Then how do you plan to win?" Elena's mental presence grew cold and determined. "By being willing to pay any price." "Admiral, are you receiving readings from the dimensional rift at coordinates 77 Mark 9? Vexithera checked her sensors. Deep in space, reality itself was tearing open. Through the rift, she could see more Devourer ships, thousands of them waiting to pour through from whatever dimension they called home. "Reinforcements," she said grimly. "Their main reserve force. If they enter this dimension, the battle is lost. The galaxy falls. What can we do to stop them?" Elena's reply came with absolute finality. "Someone has to go through that rift and collapse it from the other side. It's a one-way trip." The neural link showed Vexithera what that meant. The rift led to a dimension where the laws of physics worked differently, where matter and energy behaved in ways that would be fatal to normal life. Whoever went through would have minutes at most before their molecular structure collapsed. "Your people could survive longer in that environment," Vexithera said. "Some of us, yes. We've modified ourselves to survive in impossible conditions. But even we can't last long in a dimension where matter itself is unstable." On the display, the first Devourer reinforcements were beginning to emerge from the rift. These ships were even larger than the ones already in the battle, their hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets. "How many ships would you need for the mission?" Vexithera asked. "One," Elena replied. "My flagship and her crew. We're the most advanced integration of human and ship consciousness. We have the best chance of surviving long enough to complete the mission." Vexithera felt shock ripple through the neural link. "You're planning to sacrifice yourself." "I'm planning to finish what my species started 50,000 years ago." The battle intensified as more Devourer reinforcements poured through the rift. Human ships fought desperately to hold them back, but they were being overwhelmed. For every Devourer ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. "Admiral," Elena continued, "I need your remaining forces to create a diversion. Draw the Devourers away from the rift long enough for me to reach it." Vexithera looked at her tactical display. The Coalition had fewer than 100 ships left, ancient vessels with obsolete weapons facing an enemy that had just destroyed their entire fleet. It would be suicide. "Consider it done," she said without hesitation. Elena's gratitude flowed through the neural link like warm light. Thank you, Admiral. After this is over, my people will remember what you and the Coalition have sacrificed. Will they stay? Will humanity help us rebuild? There was a long pause before Elena replied. Some will stay. Others will return to the void. We've become something that doesn't quite belong in normal space anymore, but we'll leave guardians, hidden stations at the galaxy's edge watching for any sign that the Devourers might return. Vexthara began issuing orders to her remaining ships. They would make their final charge against impossible odds, knowing that their sacrifice would give Elena the chance she needed. Admiral, Elena said through the neural link, there's something else you should know. The Coalition species, you have potential. In time, you might become something as powerful as we are. The galaxy will need guardians and we can't be here forever. What do you mean? The void changes you. We've become something that exists partially outside normal space and time. Eventually, we'll fade into the dark matter streams between galaxies. But you, your people, you could learn to do what we do. Become what we became. The thought was staggering. Entire species evolving beyond their physical forms, becoming living weapons against the darkness. Would we still be ourselves? Vexthara asked. You would be what you needed to be, Elena replied. Just as we became what the galaxy needed us to become. The Coalition ships began their final charge, accelerating toward the massive Devourer fleet. They were hopelessly outnumbered, but their sacrifice would matter. In the void between stars, the silent had spoken, and their words would echo through eternity. The price of salvation. Admiral Elena Vasquez felt her consciousness merge completely with her flagship as they approached the dimensional rift. The ship's quantum biological hull responded to her thoughts, weapon systems integrating with her nervous system, engines becoming extensions of her will. Around her, the crew of 3,000 had become part of the ship itself, their minds linked in a neural network that spanned the entire vessel. Through the quantum link, she could still feel Admiral Vexithara's presence as the Coalition forces made their desperate charge against the Devourer fleet. The crystalline Admiral's courage blazed like a star in Elena's consciousness, inspiring her own crew as they prepared for their final mission. Coalition ships are engaging the main Devourer force, reported Commander Chen, though his voice came from everywhere and nowhere within the ship. After 50,000 years in the void, the distinction between crew and vessel had blurred beyond recognition. They're drawing fire away from the rift. Elena felt each Coalition ship that died in the diversion. Their sacrifice burned in her mind like physical pain. These beings had given everything to create this one moment of opportunity. Approaching the rift now, announced Lieutenant Torres, her consciousness flowing through the ship's sensor arrays. Dimensional stability is fluctuating. The barrier between realities is weakening. Through her ship's eyes, Elena could see the rift clearly now. It was a wound in space itself, 10 kilometers across and growing. Beyond it lay a realm where physics worked differently, where matter existed in quantum superposition, and energy behaved like living tissue. The Devourer reinforcement fleet stretched endlessly into that alien dimension, millions of ships waiting to pour through. All crew prepare for dimensional translation, Elena announced. Her words rippled through the ship's neural network, reaching every consciousness that had chosen to become part of this final mission. The ship dove toward the rift, its living hull beginning to change as they approached the dimensional barrier. Quantum biological systems activated, preparing to survive in an environment that would destroy normal matter within minutes. Elena. Admiral Vexthara's voice came through the quantum link, strained with effort as she fought her own desperate battle. Our sensors show massive energy buildups around the rift. The Devourers are trying to stabilize it. Understood. We're going through now. The ship crossed the threshold between dimensions and reality exploded around them. Elena's consciousness scattered across impossible geometries as the laws of physics rewrote themselves. Matter became probability, energy became thought. Time flowed backward and forward simultaneously, but her crew held together. 50,000 years of evolution in the void had prepared them for this. Their quantum biological forms adapted to the alien environment, their consciousness remaining linked even as their individual identities began to blur and merge. Target the rift generators, Elena commanded, her thoughts now spanning the entire ship entity they had become. We have minutes before dimensional decay destroys our molecular cohesion. Through sensors that existed partially outside normal space, She could see the Devourer infrastructure maintaining the rift. Massive constructs built from crystallized space-time, powered by the consumed energy of entire star systems. They were beautiful in their mathematical precision, and absolutely evil in their purpose. The ship entity opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have been possible. Dark matter cannons that fired compressed probability, quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, energy beams that rewrote the fundamental constants of physics along their path. Devourer ships moved to intercept them, but these vessels were designed for normal space combat. In this alien dimension, the human ship entity moved like a thought-given form, phasing through attacks and striking at targets that existed across multiple probability states. First generator destroyed, reported what had once been Commander Chen. Dimensional stability decreasing by 12%. But the effort was taking its toll. Elena could feel her crew's consciousness beginning to fragment as the alien environment worked against their molecular structure. They were literally coming apart at the quantum level. Elena, Admiral Vexithara's voice was growing faint as the dimensional barrier interfered with their quantum link. Human reinforcements are arriving in normal space. Your main fleet is engaging the Devourers. Through failing sensors, Elena caught glimpses of the battle in normal space. Human ships were pouring through the galaxy's edge by the hundreds of thousands, but they were taking massive casualties as they fought to contain the Devourer forces already through the rift. Second generator destroyed, announced Lieutenant Torres, though her individual identity was becoming harder to distinguish from the ship's consciousness. Dimensional stability at 60% and falling. Elena felt time running out. Their quantum biological forms were breaking down faster than expected. They had minutes at most before their consciousness scattered into the alien dimension's probability streams. But there was a third generator, the largest one, positioned at the rift's center. Its destruction would collapse the dimensional passage, but it was protected by the entire Devourer fleet in this realm. All remaining crew prepare for final integration, Elena announced. We're going to become something that has never existed before. One by one, the remaining consciousness aboard the ship abandoned their individual identities completely. 3,000 minds merged into a single entity of pure will and purpose. Elena felt herself becoming something greater and smaller than human, a living weapon forged from courage and sacrifice. The ship entity dove toward the final generator, passing through Devourer defensive fire as if it were merely light. They were no longer bound by the normal rules of matter and energy. They had become an expression of pure intent. Admiral Vexithara, Elena transmitted through the collapsing quantum link. Tell my people that we chose this. Tell them that Earth's children kept their promise. Elena, no. But the transmission cut off as the ship entity reached the final generator. Elena, who was now more than Elena, wrapped her ship consciousness around the massive construct and began to tear it apart from within. The generator exploded in a cascade of collapsing dimensions. Reality folded in on itself as the rift began to close. Devourer ships caught halfway between dimensions were torn apart by the dimensional shear. Elena felt her consciousness scattering across probability streams as the alien dimension rejected her presence. But in her final moments, she felt something else, the presence of every human who had ever lived and died in the void. Their spirits, somehow preserved in the quantum foam between realities, reached out to welcome her home. The rift collapsed completely, trapping the Devourer reinforcement fleet in the alien dimension. In normal space, the remaining Devourer forces found themselves cut off from their supply lines and command structure. Without reinforcements, they began to falter against the human fleet. Admiral Vexithara stood in the ruins of her command center, watching the tide of battle turn. Human ships were systematically dismantling the remaining Devourer forces, their weapons and tactics finally proving superior to an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. Admiral, Dr. Kethavar's voice came through the communication system. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting permission to establish a permanent monitoring station at the Galactic edge. Granted, Vexithara replied immediately. They've earned the right to guard us. As the battle wound down, human ships began to withdraw toward the galaxy's edge. Some remained to help with rescue operations and repairs, but most returned to the void they had called home for 50 millennia. Months later, Vexithara stood on the observation deck of a rebuilt space station, looking out at the stars. The galaxy was healing. Worlds that had been consumed were being terraformed anew. Species that had been scattered were returning to rebuild their civilizations. But at the galaxy's edge, hidden in the dark matter streams between stars, she knew that humanity maintained its vigil. The silent guardians who spoke only when darkness threatened the light. They had paid the ultimate price for the galaxy's salvation, and in doing so they had shown every species what it truly meant to protect something greater than yourself. The void was vast and cold and empty, but somewhere in that darkness, Elena Vasquez and 3,000 of her crew had become something eternal. A promise written in starlight that the darkness would never again catch the galaxy unprepared. The silent had spoken, and their words would echo through the cosmos forever.